Think about the best idea you ever pitched at work.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, the one you spent weeks refining. And then you just watch it get buried in endless revisions, ultimately dying this really quiet death.
That happens all the time.
Right. And what if the reason it failed had absolutely nothing to do with the quality of the idea itself?
Exactly.
What if it failed because of, like, the exact adjective you used in your very first
Yeah,
sentence?
people completely underestimate that.
We constantly hear this generic advice about getting projects approved or, securing budget. We're told to communicate better.
Right. Or to just read the room.
Exactly, to be more persuasive. But we are bypassing those tired platitudes entirely today.
Yes, completely.
We are going to examine the granular, like, operational tactics used to actually engineer agreement. We're dissecting how psychological levers control perception and how you can manipulate these precise mechanics to move your projects forward.
And completely bypass that institutional
Yeah.
resistance. Because the focus really must stay on the hidden mechanics of human behavior. We are looking at the invisible levers dictating why one proposal sails through a tough committee while an identical proposal just gets shredded.
It's wild to watch.
It really is. And the difference rarely lies in the spreadsheet or the underlying data.
Where does it usually fall apart then?
The difference lies in the sequence of delivery, the framing of the concepts, and really the strategic anticipation of human friction.
Human friction, right.
Yeah, if you understand the mechanics of that friction, you can design a path around it before the meeting even begins.
And that path starts at the very beginning of any interaction, right? It comes down to the exact words chosen to open a proposal. Language shapes perception before the idea is even explained.
It preloads the whole conversation.
Exactly. The adjective you place in front of an idea preloads how the listener evaluates everything that follows. Positive adjectives prime people to like the concept.
And negative adjectives prime them to dislike it.
Right. If you walk into a room and open with the phrase, "This is probably a crazy idea,"
But the room instantly just half listens.
they dismiss the concept before the actual details even arrive. The frame does the heavy lifting, not the idea itself. Okay, let's unpack this.
Sure.
Think of it like handing someone a pair of heavily tinted glasses before showing them a painting.
I like that.
If you hand them red-tinted glasses, they are going to see a red painting. Regardless of the actual colors on the canvas, the glasses change the colors before the painting is even seen.
That's a great way to look at it.
I mean, I have to ask, isn't this just masking insecurity? What if the idea is genuinely complicated or completely untested? Are we just supposed to pretend it's perfect?
Well, no. Controlling the frame is not about deception. It's not about, pretending a rough draft is a masterpiece.
Right.
It's about understanding that the listener's brain immediately starts judging information through the provided lens. By using a negative adjective, you are artificially adding cognitive friction to your own proposal.
You're getting in your own way.
Exactly. You are actively instructing their brain to look for flaws, for complications, for reasons the project will fail.
You trigger their skeptical reflex.
Yes. So the operational tactic here is to pick the opening adjective on purpose. You have to remove that unnecessary friction.
How do we actually do that in practice?
You swap a self-deprecating phrase like, "This is probably wrong, but for here is something worth testing."
Oh, that's good.
Right. You swap crazy idea
Yeah.
for simple idea. You swap, "I'm not sure this works," for here is a clean approach. The idea stays completely identical
But the reception completely changes.
because you handed them clear glasses instead of tinted ones.
That makes so much sense. And the reverse application of this rule is equally critical for you to navigate your own workplace. You must recognize when others use negative adjectives for their own ideas.
Oh, you see it all the time once you start looking for it.
You really do. When a colleague opens their pitch by saying, "This might be too complicated," but they are actively setting you up to dislike what comes next.
They're handing you the tinted glasses.
Exactly. Recognizing this mechanic allows you to literally take the glasses off. You can evaluate their proposal on its actual merits, rather than the insecure frame they wrapped it in.
You are neutralizing their self-sabotage.
Right.
And you will start observing how frequently really talented professionals damage their own credibility before they even state their thesis.
It's honestly a little tragic.
It is. But this framing tactic, it secures the opening of the interaction. However, priming a room with positive adjectives only protects you from passive dismissal.
Right, it just forces a fair hearing.
Exactly. It does not protect you from active, aggressive resistance.
Here's where it gets really interesting. What happens when priming simply isn't enough because you're presenting to someone who is biologically hardwired to find
We
flaws?
all know that dynamic.
We all know this specific person. You walk into the meeting with one single solution, and that stakeholder who believes their entire professional value comes from poking holes in things.
They just go right to work.
They attack the tight timelines, they question the marketing budget.
They bring up highly unlikely edge cases with, like, legacy systems.
Yes. And by the end of the hour, your proposal dies by 1,000 small cuts. You wrongly assume you just needed a better slide deck or, I don't know, more data.
When in reality, all of their flaw-finding energy simply had nowhere else to go.
Exactly. Why do they do this?
Well, the chronic flaw finder operates on a very specific, predictable psychological loop. Their professional identity and their perceived dominance in the hierarchy of that conference room is tied to their ability to deconstruct your ideas.
It's how they prove they're smart.
Exactly. If you bring one option into the room, you present a single target. All of their destructive energy must be directed at that single target.
Because they have to hit something.
Right. Every minor inconvenience becomes a fatal objection because they must prove their worth by finding the problems. The slide deck is irrelevant. The structure of your presentation is the issue.
It's like if you bring one toy, they have to break it to show everyone how strong they are.
That is exactly it.
So the operational tactic to neutralize this dynamic is to bring two options instead of one. The first option is your real proposal. The second option is a decoy.
The decoy is crucial.
I view this decoy as a lightning rod. If you build a house in a storm-prone area, you don't just cross your fingers and hope lightning misses the roof.
Right, that would be a terrible strategy.
You install a metal rod to give the lightning somewhere safe and predictable to strike. You draw the destructive energy away from the structure you actually want to protect. The decoy absorbs the damage.
But the construction of this decoy, it requires absolute precision.
How so?
It must be similar in shape to your real proposal, but slightly worse on the single dimension that matters most for the decision at hand.
So it can't just be completely ridiculous?
No, it cannot be obviously bad. If you bring a terrible, cartoonish decoy, the flaw finder will instantly see what you're doing.
And your professional credibility takes a massive hit.
Right. Conversely, it cannot be too close to the real option either. If the options are virtually identical, the room might actually pick the decoy, and you are stuck implementing the inferior version for the next 6 months.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It is. The decoy must be viable on the surface, but clearly weaker at its core.
Let's apply this to a very specific environment. Imagine you're a product manager pitching a new software solution to reduce customer churn.
Okay, classic scenario.
You offer two distinct campaigns targeting the exact same user segment. Your real proposal uses a highly effective, modern communication channel.
Copy.
The decoy uses a channel with a historically lower conversion rate. Or, consider a vendor decision. You present two platform tools that solve the exact same engineering problem.
Right.
Your real proposal offers flexible month-to-month terms. The decoy locks the company into an undesirable, rigid 3-year vendor contract. You place both firmly on the table.
The outcome of this strategy is highly predictable. The flaw finder executes their standard operating procedure.
They scan the room for targets.
Yes. They spot the decoy. The decoy absorbs the flaws because it is objectively the easier target.
They highlight the lower conversion rate.
Exactly. They ruthlessly attack the rigid 3-year vendor contract. They poke holes in the decoy until they feel satisfied that they have demonstrated their immense value to the room.
And your real proposal looks incredibly reasonable by comparison.
They feel they did their job, and you walk out with exactly what you wanted.
You gave them two targets and successfully engineered which one absorbed the damage. That is brilliant.
It works almost every time.
So you've set the frame and you've absorbed their flaw-finding energy. The room seems perfectly calm. People are nodding along. The director says the proposal looks highly interesting and asks for a copy of the deck.
You leave the room believing you won.
You achieved alignment.
But did you really?
Exactly. Because the project still falls apart a week later, the people who nodded politely cannot defend the project to anyone outside that room.
And this happens because getting a nod is not the same as getting alignment.
Agreement without shared context is entirely an illusion.
It really is. And this raises a critical question regarding how we actually define agreement in the workplace.
Right.
You walk into that room carrying the weight of weeks of invisible labor. You've analyzed campaign reports at midnight. You have read hundreds of angry support tickets.
You've mapped the exact patterns of customer churn that nobody else had the time to investigate.
Yes. You possess months of deep structural pattern recognition. But the other people in the room,
They possess whatever vague updates they remember from the last quarterly all-hands meeting.
exactly. The gap in knowledge is immense, and it's usually silent.
But if they don't have that context, aren't we just handing them a conclusion they have no ability to trace back to reality?
We absolutely are.
You present the highly researched solution, they look at your final slide, they either reject it because it doesn't match their uninformed gut feeling, or they accept it for superficial reasons that have nothing to do with why the solution actually works.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, presenting a conclusion to an uncalibrated room is a dangerous gamble.
It's a coin flip.
That polite nod of agreement is nothing more than a coin flip dressed up as an executive decision. It creates a temporary comforting feeling of progress inside the meeting room.
But that feeling instantly disintegrates the moment a vice president outside the room pushes back.
Because the stakeholders who nodded cannot defend the mechanics of the solution, because they never understood the mechanics of the problem.
Right. Pitching your conclusion louder, using more assertive language, or adding more bullet points will never generate true alignment.
True credibility lives in the shared context, not the final slide of the presentation.
So the operational tactic to cure this illusion is to completely flip the standard presentation order. Do not sell the solution first.
You must build the picture.
You have to walk the room through the exact campaign result, the specific customer support ticket pattern, and the exact funnel drop-off point that framed the problem for you in the first place.
You must transfer your pattern recognition into their minds.
You're creating a shared, undeniable view of the problem so that the solution organically makes sense.
And if you hit a wall and cannot reach an agreement, you must immediately assume someone in that room is working with missing context.
Find the gap, close the gap, and ask again.
Now, this process of building shared context requires discipline.
It's not just a data dump.
No, you're not dumping all your raw data onto the table and hoping they sort it out. You are curating the specific data points that construct the frame.
You're showing them the specific support tickets where customers explicitly stated they misunderstood the pricing tier.
Yes, you are showing them the analytics dashboard, proving the drop-off happens consistently at day 21 of the onboarding sequence.
And once the room sees the same structural cracks in the foundation that you see, they will naturally arrive at the same architectural solution.
The solution ceases to be your personal opinion.
It becomes the inevitable next step based on the shared reality you just built together. Now that we understand context is strictly required, we face the challenge of verifying that the context has actually been shared. We need a mechanism to prove the agreement is real.
Because we have all suffered through the empty yes just to get off a video call.
Oh, absolutely. The status meeting wraps up. You still don't have a hard answer on whether the project can move forward. You send a follow-up email. You get a vague reply.
And you are forced to schedule another sync for next week.
It's the worst. The danger lies in the questions we typically ask at the end of these meetings. We ask, does this make sense? We ask, are we aligned?
Those generic questions inevitably invite a hollow, empty yes.
Why is that?
Because human beings in professional environments gravitate toward the path of least resistance. Saying yes to the question, are we aligned, requires zero cognitive effort.
It ends the meeting on time.
Exactly. Saying no requires them to articulate a specific objection, formulate an alternative, and extend the duration of the meeting by 20 minutes.
Nobody wants to do that.
They will always choose the hollow yes. This predictable behavior is the root cause of delayed decisions and vague follow-up emails. We must replace those platitudes with specific operational forcing functions.
We replace the generic platitudes with two highly specific strategic questions. The first question is, what would it take to achieve this?
That is such a powerful shift.
It really is. This question temporarily removes all constraints from the conversation. The budget, the timeline, the headcount, the internal politics, all of those blockers vanish for the length of their answer.
It shifts the counterpart from listing the reasons the project is difficult to listing the concrete next steps required to execute it.
You aren't asking for a binding commitment. You are asking them to picture the path forward. The pressure is removed, allowing the answer to become incredibly honest.
Because this first question alters the psychological framing of the negotiation. When you ask, can we do this, the counterpart's brain scans for risk.
It generates blockers.
Exactly. But when you ask, what would it take to achieve this? Their brain shifts into a problem-solving state. They outline the necessary sequence of events.
They tell you exactly whose approval is needed.
They map the internal terrain for you. They hand you the exact playbook required to get the project approved.
So what does this all mean? It leads directly to the second strategic question, acting as a physical forcing function. You ask, is any context missing so that this represents our shared context for the problem?
That is the key right there.
This question completely eliminates the empty yes, because the stakeholder has to actively scan the problem to see if anything was left out.
They cannot just nod politely.
Right. They must physically review the data presented and make a definitive statement on whether the picture is complete.
The structural brilliance of this second question operates on multiple levels. Primarily, it signals that you genuinely care about their understanding of the problem.
You're not just seeking a rubber stamp for your version of reality.
Exactly. You are inviting them to co-author the definition of the problem. This completely changes how they engage with you. It transforms an adversarial pitch into a collaborative diagnostic session.
That's a huge shift in the room's dynamic.
It is. Structurally, it corners them into providing tangible feedback. They must either confirm the context is complete, effectively binding them to the subsequent solution, or they must reveal the hidden context they're holding back.
Which forces conversations that usually take weeks of email ping-pong to finish in a single definitive meeting.
It's incredibly efficient.
But to master these operational tactics, the framing adjectives, the sacrificial decoys, the context building, and the strategic questions, you have to constantly gather data.
Yes, you have to study what actually works in the real world.
And the ultimate operational tactic is learning how to extract that behavioral data from the hardest possible source.
This is where people really struggle.
You must learn to harvest mechanics from people you genuinely dislike.
Oh, yeah.
We all experience that visceral, physical reflex of tightening up and immediately closing a browser tab when viewing a loud, shameless competitor succeeding in our industry.
It's almost involuntary.
We watch their viral clickbait pull ahead, we cringe, and we write them off completely.
We immediately attribute their success to luck, to like a gullible audience, or to a complete lack of ethics.
It feels incredibly validating to do that.
It feels like we are upholding high professional standards, but in reality, it is purely pride.
Prize.
Yes, pride executes a dangerous sleight of hand in our minds. It bundles two entirely separate claims together. It bundles the claim, I don't like this person, with the claim this person has nothing to teach me.
Wow.
Treating those two statements as a single, inseparable truth is a massive mistake. It costs you a continuous stream of free, highly actionable data.
Because their playbook, their market positioning, and their operational mechanics are working right in front of you. Refusing to look at their methods is just a way to avoid updating your view of yourself. But, doesn't studying their success feel like lowering our standards? Doesn't it feel like admitting that the loud and shameless approach is the correct way to operate?
That's the trap.
If we study the worst people in our industry, aren't we validating their terrible behavior?
What's fascinating here is the severe irony of the situation. The people you cannot stand are actually the cheapest, most effective teachers you have available.
Wait, really?
Yes. They offer elite, working data on human behavior and market dynamics. They charge zero financial cost. They only charge a tuition of pride.
A tuition of pride, that's a great way to put it.
Studying their mechanics does not mean validating their ethics or adopting their abrasive personality. If you refuse to study what they are doing right, you protect your ego, but you stagnate your skill set.
You are actively choosing comfort over competence. The operational tactic here is to ruthlessly separate the person from the mechanic. You must force yourself to open the tab, read their post, watch their video, analyze their offer.
And write down exactly what is working using strictly neutral language.
Right. You aren't allowed to use qualifiers like, but they are fraud, or but their audience is stupid.
No, you have to be objective. Analyze the precise structure of their opening hook. Analyze their framing adjectives. Analyze the cadence of their delivery.
Map the exact mechanism that caused their message to land effectively.
Once you have isolated the mechanic and documented it in neutral terms, you execute a blind test.
How does that work?
You ask yourself a single objective question. If someone ideally respected did this exact thing, would I copy it? If the honest answer to that question is yes, then the problem was never the operational move itself. The problem was entirely your reaction to the messenger.
So you extract the tool and you leave the toxic personality behind.
That's the goal.
You don't have to follow them. You don't have to like them. You certainly don't have to share their content. You harvest the mechanic, strip it of its original context, and put it to work for your own objectives.
You use their working data to optimize your own framing, to build better decoys, and to construct tighter shared context.
But this requires a high degree of emotional regulation.
It absolutely does. You must view their output not as a personal affront to your values, but as an open-source laboratory of human behavior.
Every time they succeed, they are stress testing a psychological lever in public.
And your job is to document which levers work and integrate them into your own operational playbook.
Now that we have mapped out how human behavior in meetings and content consumption operates on these highly predictable mechanical levers,
The priming adjectives that dictate perception,
the sacrificial decoys that absorb destructive energy,
and the engineered context mapping that forces genuine alignment.
consider the environment you walk into tomorrow morning. What happens when the people sitting across the conference table from you are consciously, quietly using these exact same operational tactics on you right now? How quickly will you be able to recognize the decoy when it is placed deliberately in front of you?